Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today, we're going to be looking at our first installment of the weekly metagame breakdown for the Timeless format. This particular video, we're going to be focusing on Timeless Best of 3. I took a look at Timeless Best of 1, and honestly, it's the exact same decks that we had before Duskmourn. There's not really a huge amount. The only deviation I saw was in some of the Reanimator decks, they were playing Valgavoth as another reanimation target along with Atraxa. We've sometimes seen like Grizzlebrand or like Saint Alenda with the Sorin package in there. That was really the only change. So we're going to be focusing on best of 3 today. We're going to get the data from UntapkedGG, what you see on the screen, companion tool that runs alongside Arena's client, aggregates user win rates, gives a whole bunch of cool stats. And then I'll paste and timestamp all these videos so you can jump around as much as you'd like. I'm still recovering from COVID, if you're not aware, so my voice is a little choppy. I might have to stop to catch my breath somewhere through the video. But please bear with me as I'm slowly starting to feel human again. So yeah, let's jump into it. You'll see at the top right-hand corner, we are almost at 15,000 subs on the YouTube channel. If you haven't subbed to the channel, free, easy, helps out the channel. Helps me to keep putting these out every week. And if you have subbed, thank you in advance. Likes and comments, as always, are greatly appreciated. It helps with the YouTube overlords to help push out my content. In terms of popularity of the day, it's been pretty like cannibalized. We have energy decks for show and tell. There's not a huge volume in the last 2 weeks since the new set came out. Since Duskmourn, we've had 10,000 games of best of 3. The highest win rate deck, and this comes in part from this Callum Makar user who went 21-3, is Jeskai Energy. Yes, we've had Jeskai Energy before, but that's a control deck. This is an aggressive deck. 87%, 23 matches, basically all that one player is contributing to this. And we've seen a couple of these decks before, like I was watching during metagame challenges and the qualifier weekends. So the base Boros Energy deck, Ajani, Amped Raptor, Galvanic, Guide of Souls package, Oscillot's Pride, but you have Mockingbird in here. Mockingbird can copy Oscillot's Pride, Guide of Souls, any of those effects. It enters as a copy, so it should trigger like the Amped Raptor's ETB effect. Then we also got Phantasmal Image in the most recent special guest. This art is crazy on this one. So Phantasmal Image is kind of a boomer effect. This card saw quite a bit of modern play at one point in time, like pod decks and stuff like that. You can have it enter the book as a copy of any other creature. When this creature becomes the target of spell or ability, sacrifice it. I think the Humans list used to play it too, just as like extra copies of creatures. So this is another way you can clone and copy any of these effects. You can legend rule as well with a Johnny to flip it that way there, which is kind of cool in that sense. Licensors main, your kind of core package, also some Mishra's Bauble, just as a cheap kind of card draw effect in here. Couple of like the Surveil lands, you have some Aether hubs in here. Interesting to see the Aether hubs, just given that you're not playing up to 3 mana. I would probably just, I know the deck's doing really well, but I usually don't love Aether Hub. And then with this deck just being pushed a little bit more for mana, I would probably just play like, I don't know, maybe some more like dual lands, just play like a Steam Vents and like Hallowed Fountain maybe, like just kind of even it out, or even just another Sacred Foundry in there. Vexing Baubles predominantly for show and tell matchups or anything that's trying to like cheat stuff into play for free. Any of like the evoke creatures would get countered, stuff like that. You have Containment Priest, which is really nice against anything cheating into play, reanimate style decks, stuff like that. Lavinia is nice against like show and tell, and again, anything that's trying to cheat the casting cost of stuff. Sun Cleanser for the mirror, License Hearse for graveyard hate, White Plum Orchard against greedier mana bases, you can attack it. Even against stuff like Belcher, they don't have basics, so you kind of just stone rain them in that regard. What's interesting, and you'd think with like the blue, you may want access to something like Dovin's Veto or like Mystical Dispute, just some cheap counters could be another consideration for the deck. Again, like it's doing very well for this user, but one of the things you always kind of like to discuss is what else can be like changed or modified and adapted over time. The next deck is Delirium, 76%. This deck is super sweet. I probably gotta give this one a go. This is like screams my type of playstyle. So we have a Delirium package with Luris, a couple new cards in here. Fear of Missing Out. FOMO enters, you discard a card, then draw a card. Now, notably, if you're Hellbent, you just draw a card. And then if you have Delirium, you get an extra, you untap a target creature, you get an additional combat step, which is kind of nice in that regard. 2/3 body, it's an enchantment creature on its own. You also have Patchwork Beastie, which is a self-enabling miller. So it's a 1 mana 3/3, but it can't attack or block unless you have Delirium. Your upkeep, you get to mill a card. So it kind of fuels the graveyard there. You have things like Nethergoyf that takes advantage of the graveyard. No regular Goyf. Only 2 Bowmasters main, which is a little interesting. Once Upon a Time, free spell. DRCs mixed into their disruption package of Inquisition and Thoughtseize. Some bolts as well. Arena of Glory as a way to haste out your stuff. Full 4 Arena of Glory. So haste out those fear of missing outs. Get that the extra combat step right away. Fatal Push has more removal. Ghost Vacuum for Graveyard Hate. Haywire Might, Artifact Enchantment Hate. Artifact Enchantment Hate with Pick Your Poison. You have Kroxa here, which can be used in like the grindier matchups. It's kind of interesting not to see Kroxa main, because like you'd imagine your opponent's going to bring in Graveyard Hate, given that you're heavily reliant on the graveyard. But then you have something like this that further plays into your graveyard. I think, like, to me, this is more of a main board card that then you'd maybe bring out. Pyroclasm for like the energy decks, and then Whirling Vortex for show and tell. The only other thing I would think maybe is just with some of the configuration, I would probably want access to the full set of Bowmasters in the 75. Because this, if they bring Graveyard Hate, this becomes a dead card. Doesn't attack or block. So this is something you'd probably be boarding out more often than not. And then you kind of switch your package in that respect. All right, so we got slightly weird one. I'm going to preface that. Dimir Reanimator, Dimir Midrange. This looks a little bit more like Dimir cards I own in some extent. So a couple questionable things. Like what jumped out to me is like we're seeing a couple copies of Etor and Oculus in here. 72% win rate, 25 games. So it's still a reasonable set. You have Rusko in here. You have Tasha. Cards that don't really see much play in the format. Like only 2 Sorin's Ransom, which is usually higher played in these control decks. Like Torment of Hailfire is not a timeless constructed card. You're not generating the requisite mana to really make this a punishable effect unless you hit like a big thing off mana drain, for example. But it's just the mere like control-y style strategy. Winning from your Bowmasters, you have Shelly in here. Notably no One Ring in this particular version. So you're not playing Luris, but then you're also not playing One Ring. But kind of wanted to just show like you have the Oculus package in here and as a newer card. Sideboard's got a whole hell of one-ofs. Kill things, counter things. So kill, minor misstep, very niche counter spell. Stern Scolding's useful. You have Needle, you have Surgical, another Thoughtseize. Like Tragic Slip is not a constructed playable card. You're not really going to have too many things that are dying from Morbid. Finds a powerful counter spell. So a bunch of counters, some hand hate, Toxic Deluge. Ghost Quarter, again, is another card that's interesting, but I guess against the Belcher, it's a strip mine style effect. There's not really too many Field of Ruin or Field of the Dead decks kind of going around. So this one's a little odd. I wanted to show it because it has some new cards. The Dimir Frog list is a lot tighter list. We'll see here, 71%. So taking advantage of Psychic Frog, you have Tameo, just very strong effects here. Brainstorm can flip Tameo at instant speed and also kind of negate removal that's targeted against her. We also got Printing of Damnation as a special guest, so that's something that these lists can have access to in the future should they want over something like Toxic Deluge, so you don't have to worry about your life total. But just tempo-oriented Frogs, Bowmasters, Nethergoyfs, all ways to kind of pressure your opponent in terms of the matchups. Bloodchief's Thirst as more removal, Pierce, Spell Snare, just cheap disruption, Stone of Erich for any of the sack, like exile effects, also some incidental graveyard hate, Surgical for combo hate, Demonic Tutor basically is extra copies of any of the sideboard cards you bring in, another Deluge, Meat Hook as more sweepers for like the energy decks, graveyard hate, and then Disruptive, as its name is, Disruptor Flute, taxes both the casting and activation of spells. We have Mardu Energy, pretty stock list. We won't go too deep into it, but 66%. So this is pretty stock from what we've had before. The Nightmares in here, this is a Luris version, so no Obnixilus, no Flage. Some peddlers in terms of hand hate, but pretty go-to stock list in terms of Mardu Energy. We've covered this a number of times, but basically your core energy package with nightmares to rebuy stuff, peddler to attack their hands, and bowmasters as kind of a pseudo removal spell. Acts on terms of like the card draw effects. Needle for activated ability, prismatic endings, a flexible removal spell, hitting permanents up to 3 mana in this deck since you create 3 colors of mana. Surgical for combo hate, graveyard hate. Swords is more removal, Thoughtseize for hand hate, Vexing Bauble for show and tell, Peddler is more Thoughtseize style effects, and Licensors for graveyard hate. Sorry, my voice. Then we have Orzhov Vampires. So the core of this deck, this one's at 65%. It is a Sorin, cheat into play St. Elenda or Pain Ripper. You also have access to Dark Ritual for like Necro. You have the access of things like Grief and then Reanimate. So there's a number of ways you can kind of take advantage of those effects. Temporary Lockdown is some cheap removal. Source of Plowshares removal, Hand Hate, and Thoughtseize. Witch Enchanter land that also could be pretty flexible. Goblin Bombardment, Show and Tell, stuff like that. One Ring helps you replenish your hand and find you your combo pieces. Fatal Push, Fragment is cheap removal. Surgical, as we mentioned a number of times. Bowmaster, the heavy draw decks, low like toughness decks could be reasonable. Path to Peril for the aggressive decks, along with Temporary Lockdown. We have 4-color Scam, so this is 63%. Another deck that's trying out the Abhorrent Oculus. You have Diviner Fates in here. Whenever you discard, you connive, or sorry, it enters, you connive. Whenever you discard it 1 or more cards per turn, you get to seek a card of the same type put into your hand. So it rewards you. You could, like, with Psychic Frog, discard an Atraxa, and then it'll find you another creature from your deck. So you don't lose out. It's just kind of maintaining that card advantage. Unearth and Reanimate, so 6 effects that can kind of cheat into play Oculus, as well as these other creatures. Saturo draws you cards. You have Ephemerate that can blink and protect your stuff, get you extra ETBs. You have the Grief package in here as well. As always, notably, if you are going to be evoking Grief or Solitude with the intent of ephemerating it, you have to go into full control. So just keep that in mind. Surgical in here for Graveyard Hates. Swords removal. We mentioned Lavinia. Licensors for Graveyard Hate. Boromir is another hate piece that can be used against the Show and Tell decks. You have Glistening Deluge, so notably creatures that are green or white get an additional -2/2, so very good against the Boros deck while not killing your stuff. The only thing it'll hit is the Witch Enchanter if you hardcast it, and technically Diviner Fate because it does have white. But otherwise, like, your other creatures kind of stay alive. It'll kill your Solitude if you have it in play, but if you do that, you're probably getting value off it anyways. Lauren for Artifact Enchantment Hate. Go to Mono Blue Belcher at 58%. So this is an Ali Eldrazi deck. So it is a Show and Tell and Belcher deck. So Show and Tell still gives you the lines of Omniscience. And then with Bay of Wishes, you find your combo. Mastermind, Bond of Insight, get your approach to Second Sun. You have access to One Ring. You have access to things like Mana Drain and to cast Belcher that works. So you have a couple different ways to attack. Commandeer in this list. Exile blue cards, your lands, because your Belcher deck also can feed this, which gives you some value. And then this way here, you can gain control target spell from your opponent. Removal, big effect, stuff like that all work. Ways to just kind of dig into the combo. Philagi, Thundertrap Trainer, Waterlog Teaching helps you find pieces as well. Flusterstorm is cheap counter. Into the Flood Maws, bounce effect can be used in the mirror as well to bounce their Omniscience. Scolding is a counter. Harbinger is kind of the Blood Moon effect, but in mono blue. Frozen Grip for the mirror that you can bring in. And then lastly, I just want to show the Show and Tell deck has not had a good week. This was the highest win rate out of any Show and Tell decks. Most are sub 50% for the week, which is interesting. Pretty stock list. We've seen like the Waterlog Teachings version here. This is the one that did well at the last qualifier weekend. This one went to 7 wins, so notably it's just winning through Atraxa and Hallbreaker. The main board, actually no, it still has Mastermind's Exposition, so you still have the combo with like Approach, but it's only leveraging a single approach, and then you'd have to naturally dig into it as opposed to the Mastermind plan. A fewer sideboard slots dedicated to it. Path to Peril, Corrosive Grip for the Mirror, Defense Grid, Heavy Counters, Corrupt Decay blows up pretty much all the hate pieces, Uncounterable, Thoughtseize for hand hate, Surgical for kind of graveyard disruption and stuff like that. That's it for the week. Let me know what you think, what you've been playing, if you've got any hot tech, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.